Diana thought what the princess meant when she said that this was not just a marriage, but a union of a higher order. She asked him not to make him laugh, because she was Theodore's destiny. A fateful first meeting. She was there during the most difficult periods of his life. The death of his brother made their relationship even stronger, and besides, she is in a close relationship with the union of the three. However, from Diana's point of view, the princess proudly asked if she thought the wedding would be different because of the bride. If he married her, the wedding would have a special meaning. A marriage ending hundreds of years of struggle, a grand wedding union for the sake of peace, a special marriage. A wedding that attracts the attention of the whole world only because it is the union of Alexandra and Theodore. And not Theodore and her, that's what angered Diana most of all, but it had already come to the wedding, which means there was no turning back. And at that moment, smiling right in the princess's face, she decided that then she would never, under any circumstances, allow her to gain his love. At the same time, Alexandra thought that her expression was still strange. She wondered if she had reacted too weakly. And when Lady Diana held back all the jets of flame out of anger, our heroine just tiredly thought that social life is hard. When there was a knock on the door, the irritated lady thought that the maids had already returned and wished that she had not yet shown the princess her place. Sasha ordered the guests to enter. James entered the waiting room for the newlyweds. Lady Diana's gaze became surprised. She did not understand what he was doing here. The guy got down on one knee and lowered his head and said that he was glad to welcome Her Highness the Princess. The ceremony would begin soon, and asked if she had any problems with the preparations. The girl was very struck by the fact that he follows the official etiquette of a warrior established for the royal family, as Her Majesty also said. Looking at James without emotion, Alexandra said that such an appeal still sounds strange. There are no special problems, so he can get up. The smiling princess told James that, by the way, they had not chatted with him for a long time. The guy replied that they rarely met, so he could not introduce himself properly. But in an instant, he directed his gray eyes to the side and, standing up and looking at the girl, asked what Diana was doing here. His old friend was simply stunned and froze in place with fright, wondering how much he knew. She knew that James was not as easy to deal with as the fool Nigel, and, sweating nervously, she realized that one wrong word would be the end of her. How did the princess, quite calmly and even enthusiastically, explain that she said that she had come to congratulate her on her wedding? The guy grinned incredulously at his old friend and asked if she came to congratulate her, he said. Diana smiled nervously and nodded her head, stuttering and saying that everything was exactly like that. She wished her a successful marriage. How then, the princess sadly and thoughtfully reminded her that in addition to congratulations, she also told her a lot. The girl nervously asked if she was talking so much, when suddenly the warrior blocked the girl's passage with his hand and said that he was also interested. The princess asked if he would get bored, but the red-haired knight, smiling and looking at the princess with kind eyes, assured her that it would be exciting. The princess looked at him melancholy and detachedly and thought, a glib statement that can only be made by someone who does not know what the conversation was about. Usually, listeners don't ask about the lovers the storyteller is proud of, because it's not interesting. Such stories are interesting only to the storyteller himself. In addition, if during the story your indifference comes up and the narrator notices this, he will get very angry. It's a tiresome topic, but there's nothing he can do about it that's interesting to him. The princess turned her head towards Diana and, smiling and nodding her head, seemed to ask, "Two listeners are better than one." The girl was dumbfounded, realizing what was required of her. Alexandra, smiling sweetly and winking, pointed her hand at James, who looked at her coldly and seemed to say, "Everything is for you. Continue to share your pride." There was deathly silence in the room, and then, anxiously looking away, Diana said, "It seems the princess misunderstood everything. Nothing special, wedding, peace, congratulations," she muttered under her breath. James, not understanding a word in this unrelated sentence, asked what she said, and then the princess sighed dejectedly and said that she had become so timid when another interlocutor appeared. "And I imitate Diana." The princess reproduced the words she had said earlier. "Nothing like that. She's just proud of the relationship she and Theodore have had since childhood." The girl went cold. Thoughtfully, Alexandra asked what else she said, and remembering, voiced that she mentioned that Mother Theodora valued her greatly. The princess thought that it was awkward to pronounce Diana's words on her own and decided that she would say it in a nutshell and smilingly said, "In general, Theodore and Diana are in an extremely strong relationship." This truth made James very angry. His face became darker than a thundercloud, and he said, "So she said it and asked, and then congratulated her on the wedding." Alexandra confirmed and explained that she said that their marriage is nothing more than an alliance for the sake of peace, so it must be successful. This angered the man. Diana alarmedly told James to wait, citing the fact that she had misunderstood everything, but the man had already given her an angry look and said, in a strong relationship, "You speak the truth." The princess looked surprised at the change in behavior of both of them and wondered what had happened. Watching Diana tremble with fear at the sight of James, she thought if she was so scared, then why did she say the purpose of her visit? Usually, noisy conversations with a bride about her fiancé can be a good reason for a slap in the face, but he and Theodore have a special case. They decided that they would live as business partners bound by a political marriage. Alexandra thought that Theodore considered her special, and Diana knew and was proud of such a relationship. But looking at them, the princess scratched her neck and thought that this was probably not so. The girl with the beautiful cold amethyst eye color continued to look at the people in front of her and think. When she decided to dilute the situation and reduce the intensity of passions, she told James that she was fine. The man shuddered. The man looked sharply and surprised at his mistress and was about to contradict her and explain that this was not so. But the princess, looking at him, already smiling, said that in fact, she would take Diana's side. Sasha thought that if she took Diana's side now, she would be able to play this card in front of Theodore in the future, and told James not to worry. Nothing special happened this time. But then, looking up at the warrior, she realized with what anger he was looking at her and how annoyed he was by this whole situation. Alexandra herself shuddered with fright and her eyes widened. She did not understand why he was now angry with her. James told Her Highness the Princess that a wedding comes only once in a lifetime and, with genuine concern, asked if she was really okay. Princess Alexandra nodded satisfactorily in response to the question posed by her husband's man. When the blue-eyed girl, stuttering anxiously and loudly, told James that everything was wrong, the guy seriously asked Diana to keep quiet. Alexandra didn't understand why he was angry, because there was a political marriage between her and Theodore, although even knowing the ins and outs, there would still be people who would oppose and called out to the warrior. The princess said that when they first met, she asked him to tell only the truth, so she wouldn't lie to him either, and told him to trust her that she was really okay. The guy was simply unsettled by such speeches and, forcefully clenching his hands into fists, said after a short pause that if such was her will. James bowed and said that if there were no problems with the preparations, then he would go. The princess said well. He turned sharply and with a quick step, looking menacingly and coldly at Diana, walked past her. The girl shuddered and was simply dumbfounded. How then, after walking just a few meters, James stopped, stamping his foot, which caused the blue-eyed girl to hiccup. And the guy wanted to add something, and the princess drew attention to him. He stood half-turned right in front of the door to the outside and, with kind eyes and a smile on his face, congratulated Alexandra on her wedding. The princess embarrassedly thanked her husband's man and smilingly said that he was the second to congratulate her. "No," James said, opening the door of the room. He again turned his head to Alexandra and smiling explained that he was the first to congratulate her. Leaving the room, the man again left the girls alone. Then Diana worriedly thought that she was done. She had never seen James so angry and was going to run after him. When the princess called out to her and asked where she was going, and if she had thought of saying goodbye if she had finished praising her boyfriend, the girl shuddered. Lady Diana again turned her head towards the princess, trying to smile, but she was trembling and angry. She was thinking where to hide from her. She thought that the princess was pretending to be innocent, but in reality she was a master of torture, and, mentally cursing, said that she needed to go to the toilet. The girl was surprised. But the next moment, there was no one in the room, and she asked if she was so impatient and thinking. She realized why she had such a face. "I certainly thought so. Since nothing could be done, I wished her to be freed from the inconvenience." At this time, Diana was rushing madly through the corridors. "Oh God, it's Diana." The young ladies thought they saw a girl calling James loudly and asking him to wait a second. Running up to the warrior, she grabbed him by the red cloak and, looking with crazy eyes, begged James to listen to her. The man sharply ordered her to speak. The girl worriedly said that everyone was watching and suggested we talk in another place. People around were already starting to worry. And while people passing by did not stop throwing surprised and interested glances at them, the man sighed heavily and gave up. They moved to the library, and Diana said that he misunderstood her. She wanted to offer her help to the princess, for the sake of her well-being in marriage with Theodore. After all, it is better to inform her in advance about what Theodore does not like. She told the princess about their childhood to explain how he knows his tastes. She said, making excuses, that she didn't expect that the princess would take it the wrong way and wanted to say more. But James, looking sadly to the side, interrupted her. Looking at the floor and crossing his arms over his chest, he distantly asked what this had to do with him. The girl shuddered in confusion. Proudly and with hostility, looking down at the girl, he told her that there was more truth in actions than in words, so he did not need her explanations. He explained that he knew how she looked at His Highness Theodore. The girl squeezed the skirt of her dress and said that it was too much. Concernedly, she thought that if he knew, he would definitely take her side, because he should take care of her and support her. And raising her head up, she sadly asked why he was doing this. She thought that he was simply obliged to support her and take her side, because he was alive only thanks to her brother. The man looked at her with disgust. James was about to answer the girl, when suddenly Nigel burst into the library calling him. The girl called Nigel tearfully, questioningly, and joyfully, and James frowned displeasedly at his comrade when he asked where he had gone and immediately noticed that Diana was crying. He quickly ran up to the girl and began to calm her down, and then rudely asked his friend why he was treating her like that, rolling his eyes. James said that he was just expressing his opinion. Continuing to console his girlfriend, General Nigel looked sternly at the member of the three and said that he did not know the reason. And the next moment, he shouted in a deep voice that absolutely everything was his fault, calling Diana an obedient child, and asked why he was hurting their baby. General James exhaled in irritation, unable to bear this nonsense any longer, and said that sometimes he envied its simplicity. Before leaving, he looked at the crying girl and told Diana to remember his words that he did not care how she behaved with the princess. However, just one loud and coldly spoken word made the girl shudder in fear and cling to Nigel. Looking at her with a furious gaze, the general said that if she unsettles His Highness, he will know all the consequences very well. Defensive sword, James. His name has another meaning. He will kill everyone who stands in the way of His Highness. And with these words, the man left, loudly slamming the door. His comrade looked at him in surprise, not understanding what had just happened, and the girl said, trembling and crying, that James is too rude. Snuggling up to Nigel, she said that she perceives him as a brother. But it seems that he does not consider her a sister. The general said in surprise that it's not about her, it's his difficult character, and that's how he values her. Diana said, crying, that this had not happened before. She did not understand what had changed. She could not imagine that the princess told James about her. How then she told him to forget it. General Nigel was intrigued by the part with the princess. He was interested that she was involved in this, and come to think of it, James had mentioned her too. The man, hugging his named younger sister, raised his head up and thought, if it concerns her, then he would listen to her story. Rihanna said that when she goes on the red carpet, she should casually avoid the newsboys. Bending at an angle of 45 degrees, Rosemary irritably said that she knows. And while Rihanna was irritably wondering why the all-knowing maid had left the bride alone in the waiting room, the chambermaids continued to bicker. The ceremony had already begun. The ladies of the court who were supposed to accompany the princess looked at each other in fear when the door opened. The photographers continued to take pictures. And seeing that the princess was walking, they thought that they needed to photograph as much and quickly as possible. The court ladies, Beatrice and Rosemary, bent over, were afraid of doing something wrong and anxiously spoke among themselves that they should go calmly and naturally. Alexandra thought that the clicks of cameras were like the flapping of a bird's wing. If you followed their sounds, then at the end, this man would be waiting for her. For a moment, the wind covered part of the prince's face. The princess looked forward in surprise and thought whether it was her imagination or not. She wondered if it was all because of the camera flashes. but only for a moment, but it seemed to her that embarrassment appeared in his eternally cold eyes. The priest said that this marriage is not just a union between a man and a woman, it marks the end of a long struggle between Silvanus Irugo. With the help of their marriage, peace and harmony are established in the two countries. May divine good be with them, said the Holy Father. At this time, people were amazed by their beauty, and said that no matter how beautiful she was, because of her origin she seemed small and unprepossessing. The girl said that she was ashamed to compare her with Lady Diana, and asked if they didn't look great together. While there were discussions throughout the hall about the relationship between Theodore and Lady Diana, and what would happen to them next, the Holy Father embarrassedly and joyfully said that now they should exchange vowed kisses. Hearing these words from His Holiness, Theodore's eyes opened and he shuddered. Alexandra noticed this. And looking at her husband, she thought he too became worried, but the vow kiss is a standard part of the marriage vow. Theodore restlessly looked away and apparently was lost in thought, because his eyebrows came together to the bridge of his nose. Sasha thought about it. She remembered that they told her that he would be emotional on the wedding day, because he had been quite shy before. Mentally exhaling, she realized that the more time passes, the more the embarrassment grows, and she must calm him down, and touching her husband's hand, she called him by name. Snuggled into his body, she said that everything was fine. It was just a condition when certain parts of the body came into contact. She said, "You shouldn't be so embarrassed. There's nothing special about it," and with sparkling eyes she mentally told you to be bolder. Thoughtfully tilting his head to the side, Theodore asked if she told him that there was nothing special about it. It means she has a lot of experience in kissing. How he felt ashamed of what Zhang said and thought about why he asked such a question. Raising the ends of her eyebrows, Alexandra said no and asked why he thought so. She said that it didn't really matter to her. "Because it's just a contact of body parts like this," she said, moving along the man's wrist and getting under his sleeve. An ordinary touch. The man's face instantly flushed and turned red just from one touch of his hand. He looked at his wife in surprise with stunned yellow eyes. Pressing herself against the man's body again and standing on tiptoes, she approached his face with a smile and said that the kiss was no different. "You say he is no different?" then Prince Irugo asked. And the next moment he hugged his princess by the waist, pressed her to him, and their lips touched in a beautiful kiss. Their kiss was long and tender. The princess placed her hand on her husband's chest, and the prince gently pressed his wife closer by the waist and held her head. The whole hall was bursting with cries of happiness. Everyone was simply happy, congratulating you on your wedding, and the newspaper man, crying, said that Mr. Theodore's lips seemed to say that for the rest of my life I will care and love only you. And while people were going crazy with happiness, the newlyweds had already finished. Alexandra said that he was so impetuous that she did not expect, and Theodore was surprised that this was all. The same newspaper man who was making speeches about lips told the couple to look each other straight in the eyes. Someone from the audience shouted how romantic it was. Unexpectedly, the people's reaction was overly passionate. But on the other hand, the Queen and Count Samuel looked at the princess with hatred, as if they were about to tear her to pieces. The next moment, the Queen, looking menacingly at her, suddenly grinned unpleasantly. The princess, looking around and not understanding anything, looked questioningly at the Queen. After the vow kiss, they left the wedding venue, but the wedding celebration did not end there. Theodore helped the princess get into the carriage. The wedding parade, an event through which the people learn about the wedding after going all the way, the celebration will be completed. The king also headed to Theodore's palace along the main road. How then, the princess, driving through the elevated area, saw how many people had gathered to watch, but a new couple had been formed. People, waving scarves and arms, joyfully shouted hooray to His Highness Theodore and Her Highness Alexandra. The girl looked in surprise from the carriage at the people they were passing. Such joy for them even somehow embarrassed the princess. But people did not stop screaming. They heard that she had arrived in an old-fashioned carriage to see how people were suffering because of the war. She was told not to overwork herself anymore, and many more compliments. For some reason, her heart was fluttering very much. Before that, she had never officially met with people. Mouths wide open, eyes curved into a crescent moon, expressions of happiness on her face. Seeing so many people smiling, Princess Silvanusa, without realizing it, also broke into a smile and waved to the people. Seeing such a beautiful smile on the lady's face, A blush appeared on the cheeks of all the residents, and after a second pause, they began to praise their royal family even stronger and louder. Then the princess turned to Theodore and, smiling, told him not to sit still, but also to wave. Then she noticed how much her husband was frowning and looking displeased at this whole procession, and she was surprised. The princess thought that he had been strange from the very beginning, and now he had completely withdrawn into himself and began to look even fiercer than usual. "Theodore," his wife called again. This time the man frowned displeasedly and asked what she needed. Continuing to look her husband straight in the eyes, she told him to smile without emotion, and finally Theodore looked at her with his nose wrinkled. Alexandra said that in front of him, the people who value and love him would better smile at them. Now he looks too stern. The guy said that he always looks like that. The princess explained that she was his business partner. Their destinies in politics were connected. At the celebration, the queen's eyes became bloodshot. She wanted to find fault with them so much. She asked, "But it's better to show that they have a very good relationship as a couple." Theodore thought about it. The next moment he looked at his wife again and asked if that was the only reason she looked back in surprise. And not understanding what Theodore would like to hear from her, she asked, tilting her head, "Should there be another reason?" Then the man, after waiting for the guma, thought that the wedding did not cause any emotions in her. She felt fine, but he on the contrary. "Well, Theodore suddenly said that?" Alexandra asked. The guy said that he would smile. The girl looked joyfully at her husband and asked if it was true. But the next moment, a gorgeous, wide smile appeared on the face of her husband and part-time business partner. The princess stared at him in surprise as soon as she realized that Theodore smiled at her like that and did not look away. The girl was so carried away by looking at her husband's face that in surprise the smile disappeared from her face. Looking tenderly at his wife and smiling sweetly, he asked what it was and reminded her that the princess should smile too. Alexandra gasped in surprise. A barely noticeable blush formed on her face, and she finally remembered that she should smile too. The next moment, she turned her head to the people and, smiling, continued to wave. The prince did the same, and Alexandra thought that she herself did not notice how intently she looked at him. "Be happy!" people shouted to them joyfully, smiling and wishing them to spend their whole lives together. The circle along the royal road holds the hope for the couple to live together until death do them part, and therefore she was going to divorce after Theodore ascended to the throne. And although this parade has no meaning, it is nevertheless a peace treaty. And the princess wants to protect him. These were her thoughts when the coachman asked in surprise why this led to one side. But then the wheel of the carriage completely broke, and the carriage began to fall to the side, and with it the princess, who was not expecting anything, was the first to fly. It was a real disaster due to the recoil from the broken fastening of the carriage. The horses became agitated and quickened their pace. It was clear that the carriage would definitely crash on the ground. "It's okay," thought Alexandra, who was flying face down. She was used to the pain because patience had become a habit for her. The surrounding people watched in horror what was happening, unable to even somehow help in this misfortune. The princess wrinkled her face, already preparing to hit the ground, when she suddenly heard conversations, and realizing that she had not fallen, she sharply opened her eyes. Alexandra was very surprised that she was not in pain. Her skin was hot and elastic, a feeling that was both familiar and unfamiliar. That's right, the princess realized. This had already happened to her when she first arrived in Irugo, and then she realized that she was sitting in Theodore's arms. The next moment, the man took his sword from its sheath, and with a slight but precise movement of his hand, he disconnected the carriage from the horses. With his wife in one hand, he balanced on the falling carriage and jumped down safely. Immediately after, the carriage fell on its side and drove on, and the guy just followed it with his eyes. The people were stunned, and the princess thought that she knew that Theodore was strong. But she did not expect that he would be able to stop the speeding carriage with just his feet. When he carefully asked if she was okay, and the princess said, immediately after this, the knights ran up to them and asked if everything was all right with their highnesses. They ordered the guards to strengthen the defense around the perimeter, and the coachman got out from behind the carriage and said that everything was fine with him, too. Then Alexandra thought that thanks to him she was not injured, and there were no losses, but things were bad. the horses ran away and the carriage is now broken, which means the wedding parade is disrupted, and her role as a business partner is to have a successful marriage and increase Theodore's political status. Therefore, the princess turned to her husband and, hitting him on the hand with her fist, asked him to tell the stewards to quickly bring a new carriage. Theodore frowned and reminded his wife that she had just nearly died and asked whether a new carriage was so important now. The princess said that the parade is a celebration where they pray for a happy life for the newlyweds. Meanwhile, people discussed what had happened. She didn't know how at a normal wedding, but their marriage is a sign of the peaceful union between Irugo and Silvanus, and no matter how superstitious it may seem. But for people who have just signed a peace treaty, this incident may seem ominous, by making them worry about the fragility of the agreement, or rather the Queen's faction will make the public believe it, because the Queen's people are ready to ridicule and attack it. Having expressed all her arguments, Alexandra again advised us to ask for a new carriage before it's too late. But the man flatly refused and said that he would not ask, because he knew her methods very well. The princess was surprised. The Queen will be able to delay the delivery of the carriage in any way, saying that the old one will not go and another one is needed, for example, and so she will delay and delay. And in the end, he will send the carriage only in an extreme situation, as the intervention of His Majesty. But this carriage will not be solemn, but, on the contrary, old and shabby. Well, feel the embarrassment of the crowd looking at you, and over time the ardor of the crowd will cool down and their opinion will be on their side, so the Queen reasoned. At the same time, ordinary people were all discussing how this happened, and thought that the procession would be stopped. But everything was going wrong from the very beginning of the event about the end of the war. However, Alexandra suddenly said after hearing the conversations, no matter how long it takes, she would rather wait than not finish the wedding parade. She wanted to meet the hopes and expectations of people, because the princess for them is hope and a symbol of peace. Many were waiting for this moment, and then the princess again turned to Theodore and asked if this could be done. In response, Prince Irugo smiled slightly, and then with a smile on his face, he said a definite no. This shocked the princess very much. She even shuddered and froze as she processed what was said. But quickly coming to her senses, she stuttered and said that this was too much and asked her husband to think more seriously. Suddenly, she noticed that she was holding her like a small child. The hand that he held under her knees was put to her mouth, and, looking into the distance, she began to whistle. At the same time, citizens asked what the unexpectedly overturned carriage meant. The drunkard said that it was all over, and he realized this even at the moment when the Sylvans themselves began to ask for trouble. He clicked and asked if they needed them to investigate the monsters. In his time, they attacked the monsters before dawn, and after sunset they defended the borders, when they heard the sound of hooves and turned around. A black horse quickly jumped right over all the people. The drunkard yelled at his friend and said that it was a monster. The people were surprised, and the princess was no exception. She was amazed, but unlike them, she knew it was not a monster. Only for a moment can he be mistaken for one, since he is stronger and more powerful than the others. But he is a huge black stallion with amber eyes, dressed in armor that imitates horns. Stunned, Alexandra asked her husband if this was his war horse. The smiling guy said yes. They went through many battles together. The princess admired, for the people of Irugo, the next most important thing after the sword is the war horse, especially if it is the war horse with which Theodore went through the war. You couldn't find anyone better for the role of a ceremonial carriage, when suddenly Alexandra embarrassedly told her husband that she didn't know how to ride horses. The slightly surprised man smiled the next moment and hugged his wife to his chest. He and she climbed onto the black warhorse, holding the princess in his arms, and sat her sideways in front of him. He looked into Alexandra's eyes with a smile and said with a kind look that he knew this. The princess, a little embarrassed, closed her eyebrows to the bridge of her nose in surprise and asked if he liked to make fun of her. People volunteered to help His Highness to clear the way, and there were also assistants. And the little girl, sitting on her dad's shoulders, joyfully looked forward. She opened her eyes with enthusiasm and pointed her finger at the newlyweds to Dad and said to look at the prince on a black horse and the fairy.